Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the Premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
That's right. It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. Brandon Scott, Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez producing this thing for us. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review. Hit the like button on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page. You can also comment on the podcast there if you so choose. We appreciate everybody for listening and for joining. Now, Adam, the last time we talked, it was before the back-to-back games against the Phoenix Suns. It was after the Oklahoma City Thunder game. And one of the last things we talked about was how could they get Jalen Green going, whether it's time to make the decision to put him on the bench. And that was because he had several back-to-back inefficient shooting games, which were in line with a lot of what we had seen from him lately. And then lo and behold, man, he goes off for 34 in both the loss and the win against the Phoenix Suns. The loss was a little less efficient, but you could argue he was one of the few guys to even show up in that game in the loss. And then, of course, this was a more efficient, arguably, at least you could make the case that it was his best or one of his better games that he's played all season. I'll lead with this, Adam. The thing that I liked the most about what I saw from Jalen Green in the most recent game against the Suns was how he got things going early in transition, feeding off of some of the things that they did defensively, off of steals, being a threat and an issue in transition, and then later on making some really good, I thought, half-court one-on-one moves against Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. Like it seemed like the start of the game really propelled the way he played throughout the rest of it. Curious what you thought of watching him over the last couple of games.
Yeah, I didn't think the game on Thursday was that good a game. I know he had the 34 points. Most of the damage was done at the three-point line. He did get to the free throw line a little bit, which is a good sign. But I don't know if you can say a guy had a good game when he was, let me find it exactly, when he is 10 of 20.
It was a bad shooting percentage for sure.
Yeah. Can you say that you played a good game when you're 10 of 28? I'm skeptical of that. But again, the three-point shooting was good. And he did find a way to impact the game in other ways, whether it was on the rebounding or getting others involved. I thought Saturday was one of his best games of the year. 34 points on just 23 shots, made half his threes. He was impactful when it came to the rebounding. He had 9 of them, 4 assists, only had 3 turnovers. I mean, that's a really good game. That's the sort of stuff that he needs to be able to stack on top of one another. If you can stack games like that, one by one, then you're really talking about something. But for now, I guess the one thing that really stands out from the 2 games overall is the three-point shooting. If that can get on track, then all of a sudden the conversation, I think, changes and he becomes a much different player than the guy who's been shooting 30% from 3 for much of the year. So that's what I'm looking to see. I'm looking to see the three-point shooting really from here on out. Like if he can continue to shoot the 3 well, then it's a different conversation. If the three-point percentage kind of comes and goes and there's peaks and valleys and it's just not consistent, then, that's a conversation in of itself. But I thought Saturday was a really good game. And also, one other thing, the way that he went at Bradley Beal, I thought was important too. And this is something that I think Ime Udoka has really been wanting all season long, was just his guys to really rise to that physical challenge. And if guys are gonna, punk you or whatever, then you got to go at them. And Cam Whitmore did it to Devin Booker on Thursday, and then you saw Jalen Green do it to Bradley Beal on Saturday. Like, these are 2 all-stars. Bradley Beal and Devin Booker are all-stars. They have had terrific careers, could wind up in the Hall of Fame one day. And for a couple of young guys like that to go at those 2 guys, not be afraid of it, I thought that was really important.
Yeah, I actually appreciated the no back down, the attitude. I mean, we've had conversations. I think Ime Udoka has spoken on it as well. And we've had the conversations about moments when the team has lacked a physicality, so a certain level of toughness, whether that be physical or mental toughness. And I agree with you that was one of the more encouraging signs, to see him not really back down. Bradley Beal's doing the Matt Barnes against Kobe Bryant fake the ball in your face, and then he actually ended up tapping him on the head and everything, like way excessive and disrespectful, something that I feel like you actually don't do to a player that you respect. That's why it was wild whenever Matt Barnes did it to Kobe Bryant. It's like, dude, what are you doing? But to see him respond to that the way that he did, I thought was encouraging. But I'm with you on this 3-point shooting part, because to me, that's really been the difference in him being a reliable player and like or I should say a reliable and consistent scorer, and not being like the inconsistent jump shot. You got ratio on Twitter last week for just quote tweeting the point that Kelly Iko of The Athletic was making about Jalen Green's decision making, when the reality is you guys are right about that, and it is to some degree parroting what Ime Udoka himself has said about Jalen Green and his improved decision making out there at times. Whereas for me, it was like, yo, that's not even what the complaint is. Like we acknowledge that he's, kind of developed in the way that he sees the game a lot this year, but it hasn't translated in terms of performance. The shooting hasn't been there. Like the jump shot itself just has not been consistent, whether he was making a good decision or not. And then he's not a perfect player. So when he does make a bad decision, it sort of exacerbates his already inconsistent play and what I would call just a flat out broken jump shot, because you can't really predict when it's going to be on and when it's going to be off. And that was, for me, I guess, the takeaway. I'm right there with you in terms of like trying to see how sustainable is this, because we've seen him do this before. It's just been a matter of him being able to string along games like this for longer than, say, a week or so, or whatever that was at the end of January when he had that really strong stretch. It's like, what's the repeatability factor with that jump shot? Because to me, it's the difference between him being closer to the player that, the player that they envisioned him being, and the player that we've been watching over the last however many weeks it's been. So to me, that's the big thing to watch, is how consistent can that jump shot actually be.
Yeah, and one of the things I've wanted to do, and I might do this while we're like recording this podcast right now, but we've talked about the 3-point shooting and how bad it's been. A lot of that you can point to him. Like, let's just be honest. He has taken the second most threes on the team. Actually, let's see, just in terms of overall volume, yeah, he's taken the second most threes on the team, and yet the percentage has been really bad. So he's going to get those opportunities based on the position that he plays and who he's on the floor with. So if he can become even just league average in that department, I think it changes a lot of the discussion for him, because as Rafael Stone said after the trade deadline, he has tools that cannot be replicated on the roster. And you see it when he gets in the open floor. There aren't guys that can do a lot of the things that he can do when he's in the open floor. He has the ability to get to the rim. Doesn't always finish at the rim, but that's a whole other story. But he has the ability to get there. He's starting to understand how to make plays for others. Like, these are all things that can turn him into a high-level player. It's just, it just feels like the jump shot has really held him back. And then the free throw shooting to a point has too. And not that he can't make free throws, but you look at what he did the first 4 games coming out of the All-Star break. I think he took 6 total free throws. Like, that's the sort of stuff that you can't have happen. Like, there are going to be days where you get to the line and you don't get to the line, and he's averaging 5.5 free throw attempts the last 2 games. To only have 6 in the 4 games before that, that's just not good enough for a scorer. So to see him get to the line is important. To see that shot fall is also important.
Well, I would point this out just to kind of support what you're saying about the free throw shooting, and we talked a lot about this last year. But you mentioned, how many games was that where he just had the six free throws?
4.
How many games? Over 4 games?
Yes.
Okay, so Adam, 6 free throws over 4 games. You're saying coming out of the All-Star break? Am I correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
6 free throws over 4 games, dude. He was averaging 6 free throws a game last year.
Yeah,
like just a shade over 6 free throws a game, and it was the difference in the fact. Like I think the reality is. And I'm starting to accept this until there's a reason for me to say otherwise, and it'll be up to Jalen Green on how he works on his game for the narrative to change. But he's a streaky shooter. He's a streaky shooter up until this point. It's hard to have a whole lot of confidence that he's going to maintain this level of shooting, even though you hope he does for his sake, for the Rockets' sake, sure. but it's hard to predict or rely on or say, hey, man, that shot's just going to start falling all of a sudden. But the difference, I thought, and we talked about this again last year, of what made him take a leap, the reason why he was able to average 22 a game or whatever it was, is because he was averaging 6 free throws a game, which was double what he did as a rookie, or close to it, close to double what he did as a rookie, and close to 2 more attempts a game than what he's doing right now. It's a little closer as of late because he's getting to the line, but a player of that level of athleticism should be forcing the issue a little bit more. Now, I know there's some conversation online about him having an inconsistent whistle, but that's game to game. I think you can point out, like you said, that's everybody. You can point out specific situations where the whistle is inconsistent, but the larger sample size of the season, however many games they've played up until this point, speaks for itself. And it says he's not getting to the line the way that he did last year, and he could stand to do better at that. I think that would help him in his game.
Well, I watched James Harden for 8 years, and for 8 years, James, 3-point shooting, that's a variant stat. You're going to have swings when you are taking a lot of threes, but James Harden oftentimes would still have efficient games because he was getting to the free throw line nonstop. And so when the 3-point shot wasn't falling, he had an ability to get to the line. There are going to be nights where the 3-point shot doesn't fall. Can you get to the line and impact the game that way and impact scoring that way? And those 4 games that I mentioned, the game in New Orleans, the first game against Phoenix at home, the Oklahoma City game, and I guess there was another game in there that I'm missing, whatever. Or the 2 Oklahoma City games.
Yeah.
He did not shoot the 3 well in any of those games, but he didn't get to the line either. So if you're not going to shoot the 3 and you're not going to get to the free throw line, what's the point? And so that's the question that he's got to try and answer. There are going to be games where I don't shoot well. That's just how basketball works. But if that's the case, I need to be aggressive and I need to be able to get to the free throw line because let's be honest, nobody's going to be able to stay in front of him. He's too quick. The first step's quick. The second step is quick. He's too athletic. So he should be able to make an impact scoring wise, even when that shot is falling, a positive impact scoring wise, even when the shot's not falling.
Yeah, well, that's what I like the most about Saturday's game. The one that they won against the Suns was, it seemed like to me, and this could have just been a flow of the game sort of thing. I don't know how deliberate or intentional this was, but it felt like, and it benefited him, that he was able to kind of open things up or get his confidence established by doing some things in transition, which again is where he should be an issue, a matchup nightmare. Like he's got a play there, I think in the first half, where he splits Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and finishes at the rim in transition. Obviously, he had a windmill dunk, stole a tip early. Like there were things that he did early on that took advantage of his athleticism, the things that he does best. And then to me, he's got his confidence up early in the game to where now he's taking. And then, of course, he's hitting threes in transition as well, right? They were threes, not forced one-on-one ISO type of jacket up their threes, but threes that were in the flow, either in transition or just like really in the flow of the offense, that I thought were really just good shots, probably better shots than what a volume shooter like that normally gets. Just quality shots. And then by the end of the game, he's breaking down Devin Booker, he's breaking down Kevin Durant, getting to the cup, and it just the flow of it looked a lot better. Let me ask you this, because for me, going back to our conversation on the last podcast, when we're talking about, hey, is it better for him to come off the bench? Would that give the team a spark? Would that somehow give him a spark? I think I'll give him at least and I understand that it wasn't a great night efficiency wise in the first Suns game, or the one before Saturday, where it's the poor shooting percentage, but he hits, what was it, like 7? How many threes did he hit? 7?
7, yeah. 7 to 7.
Yeah, so I mean, he hits 7 threes, and then he's hella efficient on the next night or on the next game. Like for me, it did do enough to calm the whole does he need to come off the bench conversation. But obviously 2 games is not enough to like shift the entire conversation that we've been having about Jalen Green throughout the year of, how many games he's got left to prove to them that he should be a part of their future plans or to quiet trade talks or whatever. What do you think it takes now? What's a fair level of consistent play, especially based off the schedule, to say, hey, now Jalen Green's changing the conversation? No, I feel like we can agree that 2 games is not enough. But how many games do we need to see this repeatability factor that I was talking about earlier before we can start kind of changing the narrative a little bit about Jalen Green?
They have 22 games left. Can he put together 22 good games? And obviously there's going to be a clunker here or a clunker there, but can he play consistently good basketball over a 22-game stretch? Because anybody can have 2 good games. Like anyone in the league can have 2 good games. But what makes stars and what makes high-level players are the guys that can do it night after night after night. So I want to see him to be able – I want to see him do that. Can you do that for the last 7 weeks of the season or whatever, however long they wind up playing? Because again, and this is going to be a really good test because I think his first 2 years in the league, once you got to this point, they weren't playing for anything. They were just playing out the string. I think they were 13 and 40 something coming out of the All-Star break last year. They were probably around that same number the year before. They were playing for nothing. The teams that they were playing against did not care. Like that's all there is to it. At least right now, they are playing some leverage games. They are playing games where right now it actually matters. And it is highly unlikely that they wind up in the top 10 in the West. Highly unlikely, but there's still that opportunity. And so with a little bit of something on the line here, and the schedule eases up too. You know, they get San Antonio tomorrow night, the Clippers then on Wednesday. And then after that, you know, the schedule really does get, I don't want to say easy because it's still the Western Conference, but they do have one of the easier schedules in the entire league. They got Washington a couple times. They still have another game left against San Antonio. They've got a bunch of games left, I think, against Portland. When you look at the top 6 teams in the West, they're done with Denver. I think they'll have one more with the Clippers. They are done with Oklahoma City. They've got one left with Minnesota. They're done with Phoenix. They're done with New Orleans. So and the schedule eases up quite a bit. So playing important games that matter in the standings against not the best competition in the West. Can you string together games? Can you string together good games? Because he's going to be given all the opportunities you can imagine.
Another Jalen Green point that I want to mention before we move on is the rebounding. He had 9 rebounds in that game, you know, and I think that's an important number. I think that it's not like I don't think it was a coincidence because we talked about it and talked to him about it when he was having that really good stretch in late January that he was rebounding the ball and the defense and the rebounding were helping the offense and it was, you know, just helping him overall. So, I think that's big. I like your point too about having something to play for. And, you know, I take this moment to admit this, you know, like I have jokingly said and still hold on to this, that I think it's kind of a shame that the NBA has made the 10th seed something to aspire to, something as like a goal that you want to achieve. Because I mean, ultimately, it's still the 10th seed. And I understand, you know, a play-in team can go to the finals. Apparently, right? Like it's doable. I get it.
Two of them. Let's see. Well, one of them went to the finals last year. Another went to the conference finals.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's the land of opportunity. I'm with it. But specific to this team, I do like that it's not a lost season just because, just because you're aspiring to the 10th seed. It is something to play toward. And then you measure that or marry that up with the opportunity for Jalen Green, as we talked about sort of ad nauseum at this point, of what this moment sort of represents as an inflection point in his career. Those things, along with the team concept of, hey, if you guys do turn it on, like think about it like this. If Jalen Green is, some version of something close to what he was on Saturday, something, let's call it maybe better, more efficient than what he was in that first Suns game, but better than, or maybe necessarily not necessarily as good as what he was in the most recent Suns game. If he's somewhere in between there, that could be the difference in them making a run, right? We're talking about a much, much more productive player than what they've been getting during the time when they've sort of backslid and become somewhat of a non-factor in that race, or a long shot to win that race. So to me, those things could go together. It seems like a long shot that they make it, but if he turns into something resembling a star player, now we're talking about a different Rockets team, like a Rockets team with a consistently efficient Jalen Green is a completely different Rockets team than the one that you and I have been talking about for the last, let's call it maybe 2 months or so.
Yeah, and I get your point about the 10 seed not being something to like aspire for, but not all 10 seeds are built like the others. And so you look in the West, 10th place in the West right now is 33 and 29. 10th place in the East is 26 and 34. So I mean, there's a big if you're 10th in the West this year, that's a real accomplishment. 10th in the East, whatever. You don't the 10th they should just cut off the play-in at 8 right now in the Eastern Conference. But to get in there in the West, especially if they can somehow sneak in there, and again, the chances of this happening are incredibly long, but that means that you would have had to have beaten a team led by LeBron James and Anthony Davis, or Steph Curry, or Luka Doncic, or Kevin Durant. Like that's what it would take to be in 10th place in the West this year. That's a hell of an accomplishment. Now, again, is it going to happen? It's hard. It's hard to see it happening, but it's still out there, and it's still a conversation for them, and it's still a goal for them.
Yeah, and far be it from me, right, to rain on a parade. I'm the type of guy, Adam, who I'm the last person trying to give permission to have a good time. If the 10th seed tickles the Rockets' fancy and they can have a good time with that, man, far be it for me to try to upset that or upend that in any kind of way with my opinion. But I do look at it like, man, these guys used to win championships. These guys used to try to get in the way of one of the great dynasties in sports of our lifetime, and we're moments away from going to championships. And now the 10th seed is the aspiration. It just feels like a very loser place to be in. But that's where it's the reality. It sucks complaining about reality because you can't really. It's not like you can really change it. I can't just snap the finger and say, hey, I'm covering a contender all of a sudden. Baby steps. So, what can you do? What can you do? How much can you really complain? But on this Jalen Green thing, I do think it's encouraging. I do think it's also, though, like it's not enough to change the conversation, but it is very much a window into two things. Why it is that they haven't necessarily taken the step, the biggest step that they could have taken, because they haven't gotten that kind of play from that guy, but also a window into why it is that he's so hard to quit, or why it would be foolish to quit on a guy at that age when he's got that level of potential, or why it is you would draft a guy like that number 2 overall. Like that is why, because he does have that in him. It's just figuring out how to make that be a more consistent player, how to make that be a more consistent kind of production, and not just like, oh, we got a Jalen Green night. Oh, we got a Jalen Green week, a 3 or 4 or 5 game stretch. And then it's back to 3 or 6 for 14 points or whatever his game log was in the few games before that, right? Where he's putting up, 5 or 13, 6 or 17, those types of numbers, because those are the games where, like we're talking about, okay, it feels like he's not out there sometimes, and that in and of itself is hurting the team. If a player who is supposed to be that much of a focal point to what you do it is not impacting the game, he's hurting you in that point. All right, so Tari Eason. Season-ending surgery on Monday. Growth. Let me say this correctly. Benign growth on a bone in his nearest fibula.
Tibia.
Tibia. Okay, my bad. Nearest tibia. Yeah, I get that. I'm lower leg. Yeah, we've known that. So ingrown. This is kind of a gross injury in a lot of ways. I can see why it would be painful where you've got something growing on a bone in your lower leg. I see why the pain tolerance, even for a dude as tough as Tari Eason, was just a little bit too much to bear. And I'm really glad that they got this thing figured out, that they're having had the surgery. Sounds like it was a success from all the reports. You were if I'm not mistaken, at shoot around on Monday, right? So
Practice.
you were able to, or at practice, I'm sorry, practice on Monday.
Nothing really came up about it. He got asked if the surgery was successful or whatever, and Udoka didn't know. So basically we're just going off of what Udoka said after the Phoenix game on Saturday when they revealed that the surgery was going to happen. But I think it was always trending towards this. You started to hear murmurs back even in January that he wouldn't play again this season. And I think that they were hoping that the rest would help. I think that they were hoping to be able to avoid. I think you always try to avoid surgery when you can. Nobody ever wants to have surgery just because of the process that it takes to come back from surgery. And it just became to a point where they tried to ramp him up and it just didn't work. When they did ramp him up, that's when he started to feel pain. So they just went ahead and, you knock this out. As Udoka said on Saturday, it's a 4-month thing. So he had the surgery March 4th, which means he should be fine this summer, which would mean that he could take part in any workouts that they have during the summer. It means that he would be good to go for the start of training camp, which is 6.5 months away. So it's probably good that they just went ahead and knocked this out. I would be interested because I think that at the start of the year, they were talking about stress reactions. And so so the thing that came to mind, well, is this a stress fracture? Because obviously that's a very serious type of a thing. And I don't know if they thought that this growth, I guess, was like stress or whatever. It's a weird thing. It's a very weird type of an injury that you don't really know what to make of it, especially when you can't really follow up on some of this stuff. But it's, as Udoka said Saturday, he kept playing because there was never any risk of him suffering any sort of a fracture. I think if there was a risk of him suffering some sort of a fracture or some sort of a serious injury, they would have shut him down immediately. But because it was basically just a pain tolerance thing, then you try to get him back out on the floor. I think ultimately just getting the surgery done now is probably the right play. And then hopefully he can come back next season and be good to go. And this is not something that he'll have to worry about ever again.
Yeah, that's what I guess my question is. And I don't know the answer. And I'm not trying to be like doomsday or extra negative about it, but without really knowing a lot about the injury, I do, just thinking out loud, wonder what if any there would be of a long-term ramification of this. And I'm assuming that there's none. I'm not a medical expert, and I'm also not all that in tune on exactly what we're talking. I understand that Ime Udoka didn't do a great job of necessarily explaining the injury. And maybe it's more so of me not having any kind of medical expertise. But you do wonder how any kind of surgery to the lower leg impacts a basketball player's explosiveness. And Tari Eason is more of a player who's about motor. His athleticism, I don't think is elite, but it's fine. But it's not necessarily his calling card per se. I do wonder, I don't question what his motor is going to look like. That's going to be fine. But I do question how an injury or more so a surgery like this can impact mobility, if not in the long term, at the very least in the short term. Does the motor matter as much if he's not as fast, or if he's not as quick, or if he's not able to cause as much disruption as he is as an on-ball and off-ball defender? He's really grown and developed like that over the last year and change that he's been in the league, and was trending upward, I thought, before the injury, and even while he was playing through it at times, even though you could tell at times he was playing through an injury. So that would be my one concern, and it may be just be built out of ignorance, or born out of ignorance, just not knowing enough about the injury. But when a guy has surgery on his leg and you talk about benign growth, it makes me wonder how it's going to impact him in the long term.
Yeah, it's not anything that I can answer, and that's one of those things that we'd have to find out just in the coming weeks and months. Whenever the season ends and Rafael Stone has his availability, season wrap-up availability, I guess that would be when you start to ask those questions. I guess if anything, he won't be playing in Payne anymore. And so that can only be beneficial. So you hope that, I don't know if you get rid of a benign growth, can it grow back? These are all just like the questions that dumb people are going to sit here and ask. And that's basically what I am, is just a dumb person. I don't know the answer to it. It's one of these things. You don't come across this stuff very often. Like I'm sure in normal walks of life, people deal with benign growths on their bones all the time, but I don't remember covering a player who has dealt with something like this before. So, you learn something every day when you do these jobs, and hopefully as we move further away from the surgery, you start to learn a little something about it. Because I wish I had. I'm not. You'll be shocked to know I'm not a doctor. I'm nothing close to a doctor, and benign growth sounds pretty scary to me. I don't just on anything. So if anything, you hope that he'll just be pain-free, and that probably matters to him more than anything else.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a doctor, nor am I a professional athlete. So this is not to compare myself to either. But I got a little benign growth in my knee too that I just never had surgery on. And it was painful as hell from like 8th grade to in the 8th and 9th grade. Eventually it stopped being as painful, never had surgery on it. But you can still see the difference on my left knee and my right knee. And it's just like it never went away. And it's weird. Like, had I had it removed, would it have grown back? I don't know. It's a weird thing. That's not a perfect comparison. I get it, but it's just benign growth is just like, to me, weird and tricky and like kind of scary, But I think the better point is the one that you made. Is at the very least, it seems like once he gets through the rehab process of this, whatever all of that entails, sounds like it's a 4-month process. Hopefully, he's playing pain-free. It sounds like he will be. I want to ask this about Tari before we move on to the next subject. How much do you feel like his absence, his inability to play this year because of this injury, has impacted? And it feels weird to ask because it's a rotational player, but he makes such an impact on the game. What do you feel like is the impact on not having him on this team overall, on basically on what we're seeing from them?
Well, it's been really a devastating loss. Like, I don't think there's any other way to put it. Defensively, you look at the drop off that they have had since he got hurt. A big reason why that's happened was because he hasn't been out there. And I don't know if he's necessarily their best defender, but he's right behind Dylan Brooks. And, he just creates havoc out there. And so this is a team that wants to play fast. They want to get out in transition. They haven't really been able to do that at a very high level. And part of that is just they haven't necessarily been able to create the same sorts of live ball turnovers that they did earlier in the year. And so that's hurt them. So he is probably one of their top 5, top 6 guys. And to not have that for this long, it's hurt them a lot. And they were 15-12 through 27 games when they were, for the most part, healthy. And they were playing really good defense. And you just look at the on-off numbers with Eason when he's on the floor and when he's off the floor. I mean, they had a defensive rating under 100 when he was out there. And that's not a small thing. So, yeah, it's really hurt them a lot that he has not been able to be out there, especially when you consider that he wasn't out there at the same time that Brooks was hurt. And so not having those two guys at the same time, it really hurt their defense.
Yeah, the defense is the main part. It's how he, impact. He's an effort guy. Defense is all about effort. It's how he impacts the game as a guy who you're not like making a game plan around. You're just saying, hey, go out there and play and try your hardest. And he's one of the best at doing that. But I'll also point out that even though he's not like highest percentage shooting from 3, he is a capable spot-up shooter as well. Like, not a great shooter. I'm not trying to oversell it, but very much so a capable spot-up shooter that, you have just one less of those or one fewer of those out there. I think that impacts you as well. So you're down one more capable knockdown shooter and an all-out effort guy who can, impact the game on both ends of the floor with said effort. So there's a lot there.
Well, and just not having the same sort of transition opportunities. This is a team that struggles, that does not shoot the three well. But you don't need to shoot the three well when you're getting out in transition. And I would be really interested to see, and obviously this will be something for next year, but when he's out on the floor and you have just these incredibly athletic finishers like Cam Whitmore and Amen Thompson, like getting those three out on the floor together, I think would be really interesting to see next year. And again, it's about pace, and you want to be able to play with pace. A lot of times the best way to play with pace is to force a turnover and start a fast break. And I don't think they have I know they don't have anybody better at doing that than Tari Eason. And that's been something that just hasn't been there for them for now the last, 2 months.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. So good for Tari Eason that the surgery was successful. And, it looks like, hopefully sooner rather than later, by the time we look at, the 2024, 2025 Rockets, the hope is that, he's not going to be hindered by pain at the very least. And, just hopefully, prayerfully, however it is you do it, that the damn thing doesn't grow back. And like Adam said, like you said, man, there's going to be people out there asking the dumbest, most elementary medical questions that you can find out of concern for one Tari Eason. Let's move on to this piece with the Spurs coming up, because by the time most folks listen to this, it'll be game day. Going into Tuesday's game against the 13-48 San Antonio Spurs, but they are led by a phenom in Victor Wembanyama. And so it's been some time now. What has it been? A few months now since they've seen Wembanyama. This is not the same Victor Wembanyama that they played previously. He was already pretty good, but he's improved drastically, it seems. And that's to be expected as the season goes on, that he would, that his play would pick up. They're looking at a bit of a different Victor Wembanyama going into Tuesday's game. You went to practice on Monday to sort of talk to them about it. What are you sort of expecting? How are you sort of anticipating this matchup between the Rockets and the lowly Spurs with a hell of a player leading the way?
Well, they're bad. They're really bad, but
Yeah.
they are a very different team when he's out there. Their net rating goes up by about 3 points when he's out there. Defensively, they are a completely different team when he's out there. Now, we say all this, and he might not play on Tuesday. And he popped up late on the Spurs injury report with a shoulder injury, but he is everything that he was billed to be. And maybe you didn't see it early in the year. And part of that was, I mean, let's be honest, the Spurs weren't trying to win. The Spurs were basically trying to lose for a good portion of the season. And frankly, they're still not really trying to win all that much. And they put some guys into some weird positions. But lately, they have been a much better team. They beat Oklahoma City on Thursday. They beat Indiana on Sunday. Like they are playing well. They're beating some good teams during that stretch, and a lot of it is just because of him. He's at 22-10 on 49.5% shooting over his last 34 games, which coincides with the last time the Rockets and Spurs played. The block shots are just off the charts. I mean, he's a guy already as a rookie. He's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but I think he's going to wind up showing up on some ballots in that top three. He's a game changer, really, from anywhere on the floor defensively, and he's starting to figure out the offensive stuff. Ime Udoka said that they are starting to run the offense through him. He's been an initiator for them. He gets out in transition. He shot the ball a lot better. His shooting has gone from, I think, 41% to 49.5% in the last 3 months. So he's what people talked about. Like he's lived up to the hype.
Adam, there's a play, I'm trying to remember who it was against now, but there's a play where Victor Wembanyama blocks a layup attempt or a drive without jumping, blocks it with one hand, and recovers the rebound from the block without ever leaving his feet. It's like, what even, and it's not like, the guy, it wasn't Fred VanVleet, it was a normal, regular, average sized NBA player going in there trying to challenge at the basket. And Victor Wembanyama is just like, block it, catch it, not leaving his feet. Like, you talk about the Defensive Player of the Year and how he's probably not going to win it this year. I'm afraid that this might be the last year he doesn't win it. Like it's that scary, and that, like, but between the size and the athleticism, it's freaky. It's freaky stuff what they're able to do with this guy defensively, and what the potential is as he develops physically. You got to remember, obviously, that he's still a very, very young guy, and so hasn't even necessarily tapped into his full physical potential yet. And once that happens, it's like, man, they might mess around and have to rename the Defensive Player of the Year award after him if enough people can pronounce his name right, which I think by the time that time would come, we will have gotten very much used to pronouncing his name right. Like, it's freaky. And then some of the things that you mentioned in the article on sportsradio610.com, which you guys can check out, obviously, on sportsradio610.com, where Adam's previewing this matchup. Like, they're also running a lot more through him. You remember all of the jokes on the internet of, like, why they don't pass the ball to Wemby? Why are they intentionally sabotaging Wemby? Is Wemby frustrated already with being in San Antonio? Do his teammates not like him? And now it's like something's clicked, or there's been a refocus of how this offense runs, but they're initiating a lot with him. He's handling the ball more. It feels like he's taking more threes. I should maybe check that, but it feels like he's taking more threes. Man, it really feels like it's coming together toward the end of the season for Victor Wembanyama. I'm really hopeful that he plays just from a, like, they're bad enough to where the Rockets could win this game and Victor Wembanyama still play the type of game that provides the entertainment value that you would expect from a player like that, and just, at an NBA game.
Yeah, he's going to be a problem for a long time with them, and they're going to be playing against him for a long, long time. They had David Robinson, and they had Tim Duncan, and now they have this guy, and it's special. It really is. Like, it is. It's something that we really haven't seen before, and he is putting it all together. And that roster was not good. And part of that is they lost, all those guys got old. They haven't managed the roster very well in recent years. They were kind of like trying to stay in the back end of the West playoff race. So they really have not had many bites at the lottery apple. I think Devin Vassell was a lottery pick, either him or Keldon Johnson, one of the two. Then they had the 12th pick a couple of years ago, and that was Josh Primo, who flamed out after a year because of some personal stuff. They finally got into the top 10, and they took Jeremy Sohan, who's been a pretty decent player for them so far. I think they asked him to do a little more than he's ready for, but they have not had many bites at the lottery apple. They will obviously have a top pick in this draft, so they've got a chance to add somebody real next to him. They should have some money that they'll be able to spend. So the roster building is going to be big with that team, because if they can get it right, if they can get this draft pick right this summer, that's going to be big, because I can't imagine that they are going to have many chances to be at the top of the lottery again. And plus, they've got all the Atlanta stuff. Those Atlanta picks, I think, are going to wind up being very valuable. That they got for DeJounte Murray, because it seems like the Hawks are on the way down. And I know one of the suggestions that's been out there is maybe they trade the Hawks back their picks in a deal for Trae Young, possibly. And I do think that that would, obviously, I think it'd be a great trade. I think that's the one team that maybe Trae Young would really thrive on, because of how good he is offensively. And then you have this 7'5" monster who can maybe help cover up some of Trae's issues defensively. So I do think they are in a really interesting position, the Spurs are, because they have this all-world talent who is still so incredibly young, but there really isn't much around him. And they don't really have a way outside of this draft to get a ton around him, unless they make some splashes from outside the organ. Like, this isn't going to be you look at how the Thunder have built their team, not just this team, but the Westbrook, Durant, Harden team. Like, the Spurs aren't going to be able to build a team, a championship level team, that way. So they're going to have to go outside the organization, but just having that guy gives you a chance to do it.
The Trae Young thing is fascinating, because from both a basketball standpoint and perspective, because of what he would add from a talent standpoint to the team, and the full circle moment, just as a spectacle of, like, trading the picks back to get him, and the idea that they trade away DeJounte Murray to pair with Trae Young, and it turns out that they luck up and get Victor Wembanyama and then make a move to get Trae Young, the better of the guards in Atlanta. It's like it'd be full circle to observe, and also a very interesting basketball situation. Also, a bit of a nightmare for the Rockets, thinking about having to compete against that year in and year out, and just what the potential could be for that long term, especially with Victor at the centerpiece of it. So, man, it real interesting times, man. Like, I, I'm gonna go to this quote from your story on this. Jabari Smith Jr., who is not even a full year older than Victor Wembanyama, effectively the same age, both 20 years old, just Jabari several months older and obviously a year more into the league. You've got him quoted saying that one day he'll tell his children about this. It's something I'll be able to tell my kids about, which is a staggering quote from a 20-year-old guy who I assume does not have children yet, and just to even be thinking about that about a peer who is really your age, but also technically a few months younger than you and the year behind you. It's like, man, people are already looking at it like, hey, I'm going to be a part of history just because I played against this guy, and hell, anything that I do positive against him is like, cherry, icing on a cherry on top or icing on the cake, to be able to do that. So that quote stood out to me because I'm like, damn, them cats is the same age, and he's already thinking about telling his kids, man, I played against Victor Wembanyama, because it's going to be that type of experience more than likely if he stays healthy, and if the Spurs are the Spurs that they've been for our entire lives, which is an incredibly run organization.
Well, it made me think of his dad playing against LeBron James in LeBron James's first game, and now here you have Jabari. Now you have his, Jabari Smith Jr. playing. He didn't play in Wembanyama's first game, but he played against him in his second game. So they're kind of some interesting parallels, 20 years apart.
Yeah, for sure. And then of course, obviously LeBron playing against both of them, at different points in his career. Really cool parallels, and just a really interesting thought in terms of like how the players themselves view this moment historically. Like, I'm gonna tell my kids about it eventually. But probably the way that my dad told me about, man, I saw this kid LeBron, 18 years old, who had all the hype in the world, and I'll be damned if he didn't come out there in Sacramento and was like actually that guy, every bit the guy that they said he was or predicted that he might be. So it'll be interesting. I know he's got the shoulder injury and he's questionable for this game, at least as of the time of this recording. But it'd be great to see him play, especially this version of him, which is a little bit more seasoned and playing a lot better than the one that was playing the last time that they played each other. So yeah, man, we're gonna check it out. Make sure that y'all are checking out this podcast, like I mentioned before, subscribing, rating, reviewing. We got the Spurs on Tuesday, got the Clippers on Wednesday. We will be back, I imagine, at some point next week to break down the latest of what we're seeing from the team. We'll figure that out on the back end when we come back. But we'll definitely be back at some point next week to talk about all of it, man. So really, really exciting times, because you're like, yo, Jalen Green, there's a lot of pressure, but like this should be moments that guys like you are made of. 22 games to show it. Schedule lightens up a little bit after this Clippers game on Wednesday. Let's string together some consistent performances, get that jump shot consistent, and play a little bit better over a longer stretch like you were in January. All right, now I don't feel like that's too much to ask. But until next time, y'all, we got Adam Spolane, myself, Brandon Scott, Austin Mendez producing this bad boy. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review. Check us out on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube. And until next time, y'all be good.